From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. It is Friday the 13th. My name is John, and I have Sean with me, and this is a special episode of Dewey Pod Monster, the original podcast about consumption. If you weren't aware, we are members of the You Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our old and previous episodes at yourunpodcast.com, as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. As I mentioned, I have Sean with me. Sean, Friday the 13th movies, it's kind of just the two of us. We don't bring guests on for this, and these are kind of shorter and to the point general. I don't know about shorter, actually. I think the last one went quite long because it was in 3D. You have to go longer in 3D, right? It's like a rule.
Yeah.
Just more girth.
It's absolutely a rule.
But if you're keeping count.
You know what, though?
What?
I put it in the computer. It says you're a dead fuck. Sorry.
I mean,
computer don't lie.
That's fair. You know what? That's fine. Someone's going to give Teddy Bear a kiss. If you're keeping count, this is the fourth Friday the 13th movie that we've talked about, which means this is the fourth Friday the 13th that's come up on the calendar since we've decided to subject you to this show as much as possible. This one, you know, I have some thoughts about this one, and I'm sure we're going to get to that. Sean, I know the answer to this, but for those who don't know, what's your experience with this movie before this viewing? Like, is this one that you were fond of, or maybe not fond of because I kind of, whatever. Is this one that you've seen
I've
before, seen a couple
that's
times?
What you're asking. Yeah,
Yes.
I've seen it a couple times. Yeah. This is one I've probably seen the most of the whole series.
Yeah, for me, it'd be either this one or 3, and I'll get into the reasons why it's like tied with 3. But before we go too far, do you want us to do a third-party review? We usually do a third-party review for movies when we start, correct?
Yeah, that's from my experience on being on the show. We do third-party reviews.
Well, I'm stumbling my words for some reason today, which means absolutely fuck all to anyone. So far, our third-party review this week, we're going to go to a legendary and famous third-party reviewer. So let's check it out.
Good thing we paid him.
Our next movie is Friday the 13th, the final chapter, an immoral and reprehensible piece of trash that sold more tickets on its opening weekend than any other movie so far in 1984, and that is a very, very depressing commentary. It really makes me sad to think of all those moviegoers spending $4.50, $5, most of them teenage kids, sitting there watching this sad, cynical, depressing movie. That's all this movie is just mindless, bloody violence.
So now that we've heard those two babble on, Sean, why don't you tell me what this movie is all about?
All right. So for that, we head over to IMDb, where we do a little search and we look up Friday the 13th, the final chapter. This tells us that IMDb, the rating is 6.0 out of 10 with 60,000 reviews. The popularity is at 3,143 out of some number, which is up 757 from some other number. And we go to the storyline of the plot, whatever the one is on the top. It says, after being announced dead and taken to a morgue, Jason Voorhees spontaneously revives, escaping from the hospital, and stalks a group of friends renting a house in the countryside near Crystal Lake. Then we scroll on down to the storyline, and it gives us a little bit more of a in-depth take. It says, after being stabbed in the head by Chris Higgins, Jason Voorhees is believed to be dead and is taken to a hospital for an autopsy. However, he is alive and kills a doctor and a nurse and is loose once more. He returns to Camp Crystal Lake, where young boy Tommy Jarvis lives with his mother and older sister. A group of teenagers move into a house next door to the Jarvis house. Jason begins killing the teenagers and kills Tommy's mother. Now it's up to Tommy and his older sister to kill Jason and end his murderous rampage once and for all. They really get in deep there.
I like the storyline. It makes it sound way more disjointed what this movie actually is.
Yeah, I would agree.
We should probably touch on the cast because this movie probably has one of, or at least some of the more recognizable cast members from at least up to this point in the films. Of course, you have Corey Feldman, who's going to be, I don't know if he would be listed as the main star, but I think in retrospect, he's definitely the lead of this movie. He's essentially the final girl, but in boy form. Is that fair?
Yeah, he's like one half of the final girl.
Yeah. Past that, the other people that you would see might recognize in this would be Eric Anderson. He is the hitchhiker in this movie, and he's been in a handful of other shit. Crispin Glover is very memorable and very funny in this movie. If you have ever seen a horror movie dance scene that you have, they all aspire to be Crispin Glover in this movie, because I don't think, you know, if you've ever seen a dance scene in any movie, it's aspiring to be Crispin Glover in this movie.
I would challenge you to give us a better dance scene in movies.
There is none. unless someone's going to pull up and say Friday the 13th Part 5 with what's her face. It's not better. It's just not. Before we get to the main man, is there anyone you want to kind of highlight in the cast here that I haven't said yet?
I think Judy Aronson is probably a big pull. She's kind of in a lot of 80s B movies and stuff of that nature. I think one of the movies that we talked about she's in American Ninja. She's like the main love interest in American Ninja. And then Joan Freeman as Tommy's mother, Mrs. Jarvis. She was more of like probably a late 60s star. And it's funny at this point, like looking at her, she was born in 1941. This movie comes out in 1984. So she was 43 years old. And she looked like I'm older than she is now. And she looks like a mom. People in the 80s just didn't age very well. So she looks about every day of her 43 years, but she's pretty top notch, if you ask me.
It's like all those cigarettes and Diet Cokes weren't necessarily best for keeping you youthful.
Right. And no sunscreen.
They lied to us. The other name that I think needs to be mentioned here is the man who plays Jason Voorhees in this, which is Ted White. That's probably going to be a subject that comes up a lot near the end of this episode, but Ted White, to me, really takes this character to, I think this movie embodies what people think of when they think of Jason Voorhees. He's got the look, he's got the like sheer brutality in this movie. He responds in a way that still feels human. Like we haven't gotten to like true zombie Jason or anything like that yet. Like it doesn't, although there's plenty of things you could say in this that are not like realistic. And I'm not trying to claim that they are. This still feels like you're dealing with some kind of human element to Jason as opposed to just like whatever the fuck's going on. He still makes noise a little bit in this movie, and he's just a very intense and physical presence for this character that, like I said, when maybe this is just me, but I really do think that when people think of the character Jason Voorhees, this is the general model that they're thinking of.
Yeah, I would say so too. I think after this movie is when Jason becomes a little bit more of a supernatural thing. I mean, obviously, this is part 4. If you haven't seen the first 3, then you should probably watch those because, you know, what do you really need to see?
I mean, they recap it all for you in the first like 2 minutes of the movie. So,
but he gets hung. He gets lopped in the head with a knife or a machete or an axe or something. The axe, right? That's what they hit him with.
It's the axe.
And yeah, so I think after this point, he's pretty much out of the realm of even possibly being human.
Right.
He becomes a little bit more supernatural after this movie. So this is kind of like, it's a cool hallmark that this is still, you could consider it the original Jason. And one thing I wanted to point out, I like at the beginning of this movie, when they show the mask, as it kind of goes, they do that thing where it zooms in on the mask, and it's got the chunk out of where the axe went, and they carry that forward throughout the rest of the series. I enjoy that.
Which is funny because that mask would have been destroyed over and over again, like numerous times, but that no matter how many different masks he gets.
Yeah, the chunk is always out of it.
Yeah, with the exception of the space mask, that chunk's always missing. I do like that this movie, you know, I mentioned already that there's a definite tonal change in the Friday the 13th films after this movie, because when I think of 80s horror movies and 80s slasher movies, you kind of have two like big sides of it. You have the 80s side that's still kind of that 70s feel a little bit, that almost has like a borderline grindhouse feel to it, which is where this movie and really the 3 movies before this fall in. And then you have that tonal change where everything got more colorful. Cocaine was obviously much like either a different strain of cocaine or much more prevalent, or maybe much less prevalent, and other drugs creeped in. I'm not sure, but it's almost like the comedy aspect of a horror movie, basically after this one into the Friday the 13th franchise, becomes way more intentional and way more goofy and way more silly. They almost use it as a way to tone down the violence that's in the movie, which I'm sure has to do with the MPAA. But this is the last of the Friday the 13th movies that feel like a straight up slasher movie to me.
Yeah, they feel a little bit more grounded in these first 4 movies. Then after this one is where it seems to get a little bit more almost slapstick in a way. The violence,
at
how
times.
It's portrayed. Yeah, it's a little bit more comedic, or maybe not so serious. There's not such a serious tone. And I like them both ways, but it's kind of fun to see where they're still going. They're still going for it, still trying to kind of be a serious slasher, if that's a thing. This is trying to be a little more of a grounded horror movie with this kind of unstoppable killer, but who can be slowed down. Not necessarily stopped, but definitely slowed.
And for the record, I like both sides of that slasher coin too, but this one, like I said, I think really does apex in a lot of ways. We should also mention with this one, this is the return of Tom Savini to the franchise. This is the only other movie that he's worked on other than the original. And I think this movie, there's certain movies when a guy like Tom Savini or Greg Nicotero, or, you know, I'll even say like a Damien Leone to an extent, even though he's only done clown movies. There's certain guys that have, like, you notice their style and their presence in a movie, even though they're not really on screen at any point in the movie. His effects, I feel like, are at pretty much the top of his game in this movie more than any other that we've talked about. He doesn't have the like giallo looking blood at any point in this movie. He obviously worked well with the director because they do a good job of hiding really Jason for the most part until the end of the movie. Like you see him throughout the movie, you know he's there, but he's kind of in the shadows or very brief glimpses of him. And even the scenes, although I think this particular title has some of the most intense and most brutal kills of the franchise, at least the most of them kind of crammed into one movie. A lot of them are pretty quick. Like you see it real fast, and it's there and gone almost as quick as it happens. So it's really using that. Although you're getting so much more in those brief little heartbeats of chaos, it's really playing on the less is more at the same time and kind of string you along with little bits of, you know, insanity until it ratchets up to the third act. Sean, do you have any things that you really like about this particular entry that you would like to highlight before I just hijack this whole fucking episode?
Well, I gotta say, this movie really establishes that Jason hates people fucking. Like, people fucking brought him back to life in the hospital, in the morgue. And I wanted to point out there is the morgue technician eating food, which is a horror movie morgue trope. And then, yeah, he just...
That we seem to enjoy.
Oh, yeah. Who would not like it? I mean, it's great. And people fucking just motivates Jason to just take people out left and right.
I really like the mortician's death because there's a couple deaths in this movie. If you slow them down and watch them like a little bit, not necessarily frame by frame, just the mix of goo coming out of these people, the sound design where you hear some really gnarly sounds, like the hacksaw going into him, the like way his spine cracks when he basically 360s this dude's head. Like he turns it all the way the fuck around and he all but rips it off of his, you know, body. Basically, they do a really good job of showing this quick, brutal scene and just making it sound fucking gnarly.
Yeah, they do a lot of great work with the sound design on even just the kill stuff. It's really well done. The other thing I wanted to kind of mention, I don't know where I got this from, but when I saw this the first time, or maybe even as a kid, like when you would have your little talks about movies that came out or whatever that your friend's older brother or whatever smuggled that you got to watch, we had it in our head for some reason. There was this whole headcanon that Tommy Jarvis was somehow related to Jason. I don't know how we ever came up with this, but we were like, oh, Tommy must be his brother because he can control him because blah, 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 blah. You know, at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, we'll get into spoilers, I guess, at this point, when he shaves his head and he kind of like, Jason's looking at him all weird, like, you know, kind of the dog that's been told a funny joke or whatever. He's trying to figure it out and he's like looking at him. We were just
never
convinced.
heard Jason Voorhees described as a dog who's just been told a funny joke, but I'm gonna
hey, here you go.
I'm gonna try to keep that for the rest of my life because that might be my favorite description of Jason ever.
Yeah, I mean it fits, but we just for some reason thought like, I don't know. Like I said, I have no idea where we came up with it, but we were just convinced that they were related somehow, which makes absolutely no sense considering that Jason's mother died in 1969 or something, according to the tombstone. And again, if Pamela Voorhees was 49 years old when she died, I'm a newborn. Let's just put it that way. She looks a rough 49.
I also like that this movie, you know, a lot of people shit on this franchise for continuity and lack thereof. And that's fair. Like it is a fair criticism. There's not a lot of things that really tie part 1 to part 2, let alone part 12. That's story for, you know, several other episodes. But this movie does introduce it's got the typical formula. It introduces a car full of kids who are like the horniest car full of fucking kids I've ever, like every single one of these kids that's showing up there is like dead set on fucking something. Even if it's just like a stuffed animal, they're going to get off, which is fine.
They're going to get offed.
Yeah. Well, again, spoiler, I think it's funny that like of our that's one thing that this does differently is our campers in this movie. There is no survivor. He kills every fucking one of them that shows up to this camp. Now there's other people that aren't part of the campers that, you know, put up a fight or survive a little bit. But the cast of characters that if you've been watching this series, you think is like one of them is going to be the one that we follow and survives. Yeah, no, they're fucking done quick. It's great. But what I like is they introduce this character, Rob, who you can make an argument that it's not a very well done attempt at this, but it does try to tie the events in this film to the events that have happened leading up to it, because he's there at Camp Crystal Lake looking for his sister, which was the redhead. I can't remember her name right now because I'm bad at that, but the redhead chick from part 2 that gets, you know, speared in the movie, figuratively and literally. I like seeing that they actually made the attempt to have like, hey, this guy showed up looking for his sister, even though that was only 2 days ago. I don't know how quick news really would have traveled. Again, there's plot holes galore, but there was an attempt to try to tie the previous films to this film.
And isn't it so interesting that just some random character they picked for him to be the brother of? There's no like rhyme or reason to it. They could have been anybody. Could have been, oh yeah, my brother.
There's like 15 people that have died at this camp in the last 2 days, and they're like, that's probably an undersell.
This specific person.
But yeah, but still, it's an attempt to do something to try to tie these together. Is it the best example of linear storytelling? Hell no. But it's something. And I think it deserves some credit for that, because really, you don't see anything like that again until the remake, where they try to cram all that into one movie, as opposed to, you know, 4 at this point.
And not to harp on it too much, but it feels like, you know, we've said it a couple times, this movie really makes an attempt to continue the lineage and for all, you know, for intents and purposes, it seems like they did want to try and end this chapter of this story, and they do as much as possible to kind of bring you to it, from the way that Jason actually dies at the end to, you know, the brother of the sister, you know, the brother of the sister, that makes sense. Brother of whoever this girl was in whatever movie this was, all that stuff. They really feel like they thought that they were going to close the book on this once and for all with this 4th movie, but, you know, history tells us otherwise.
Yeah, well, if you listen to interviews with the cast too, like every intention was for this to be the end of Friday the 13th. And although I like all of the movies that come after this as well, like if this had, I can't lie to you and say that it wouldn't have been a better franchise if they had just stopped here. It probably would be a stronger franchise. You know, again, sometimes less is more, but that's not what we got. So whatever. What are some of the highlights that you like in this movie, or high points that you would like to point out here?
I just like that this one feels like it feels like it's trying to tell a story along with all these slashy deaths that happen. It feels like they're trying to establish these characters. And I like that in movies. I mean, sometimes I like straight up slasher movies where there's no character development unless it's a violent nature. In that case, there is no redeeming quality because there is no development. But this movie feels like it goes through a lot of effort to try and tell you the stories about these characters. You know, we go with Crispin Glover's character and the back and forth between him and Teddy and the, you know, you're a dead fuck and all this stuff, and trying to
sound like corny teenagers.
And the girl that, like, she's kind of a prude, you know, she doesn't want to skinny dip with everybody else. So they, you know, it takes a while for her to warm up to everything. It's just, they try to really establish these characters, even all the while people are kind of getting knocked off, but they try and build it a little bit before they start knocking people off. Like they feel like, it feels like they're trying to tell you a little bit more about these characters other than they're just grist for the mill.
I like that the characters, at least for the most part, they're all kind of like stereotypes of this kind of movie, but none of them are excessively annoying. They all have quirks that are kind of likable, especially Crispin Glover practically steals the if it wasn't for the fact that Jason Voorhees is in this movie, Crispin Glover would steal this entire movie. Like, he's that likable in it, just being a fucking goof and a goober, but kind of being I don't know if it's intentional or not, but being funny as hell through this movie. But even the characters like, you know, Teddy, who we've mentioned, he's kind of a tool and he's kind of a twat, but at the same time, like, you don't really hate him. At least I don't have any real hate towards him. And not to use the movie that you just did, but like, it's not like an In Violent Nature where you're like, I don't even know if I should hate these people. or why these people are here in the first place. Or some other movies where how many movies have that one guy or that one girl that you're like, you're just waiting for them to get got. There's no one like that in this movie.
Yeah, I think Teddy's the closest one to the "will you please kill this fucking kid" character of this movie, because he's the biggest asshole, but he has his own faults. He's all talk, no action, and he's trying to get laid by the twins, and they're like not interested at all in him. And I wanted to just go back real quick. Crispin Glover, this was like his first real big movie. I mean, he had been in little bit parts and stuff here and there, an episode of Hill Street Blues and Happy Days and stuff like that. But this was his big breakout for all intents and purposes. And I think, like you said, he really does kind of steal the show. He's a very likable, weird, goofy character, and he plays it excellently.
Yeah, and for what he's supposed to play, which is a weird, goofy teenager, nails it.
Oh, he kills it.
So, yeah. I already kind of touched on it, but I'm going to say this movie above all of them. We're going to talk about some of the kills in this movie. So if you haven't seen this is where your real spoiler comes in. We've already talked about the morgue kill, which that happens kind of right out the gate. But there's some kills in this movie that are just so fucking entertaining. Like the axe that goes through the door right into the girl's chest and just knocks her back into the fucking staircase, which I don't even know how the layout of this house works. It seems like all of a sudden she's in a bathroom, then she is in a living room, a axe goes through a door, and she's back in front of a staircase. It almost looks like a dirt floor at the same time. It's a fucking weird layout. It really doesn't matter. That one is super entertaining. Somewhere along the line, Jason gets a fucking harpoon gun in this movie. I'm not sure where that came from, but holy shit, does he use it to hit the best of his ability by harpooning, was that Paul or whatever, right in the fucking dick. And like the physics of the scene make no sense because he's in the middle of a lake. So it's like, what are you playing water polo with this guy's like torso via harpoon gun? Like Jason's a big guy, but he's not like as deep as a lake, I don't think.
Where there's water will be harpoon gun.
That's true. But it's a very intense scene. That's great. Of course, you have the Wrath kill, which is arguably one of the more like known kills from this entire franchise because it involves a naked girl in a raft making a great face. She pulls it off wonderfully. And I would say that, to harp on Rob again, because he's come up several times, I think he's got one of the most entertaining kills in this entire franchise because you don't even really see him get killed, but holy shit, do you hear him get killed? And this guy is just vocal as hell about it and letting everyone know that he's getting killed by Jason for what seems like 30 solid seconds of screen time.
What does he keep saying over and over again?
He's killing me.
No shit.
It's, again, the way that scene is shot too, like he's in a basement or something like that, or a crawl space or a dark area, and Jason just kind of fucking appears and just starts fucking him up, and that's kind of where it goes from there. And
he's chopping on him like he's trying to chop down a redwood. He's just like whack.
It's a pretty entertaining kill, and I haven't even got to like Jason's death yet. So do you have any that you want to point out that I forgot of? Because there's a lot of them in this movie.
Well, it's one of the last, it's not necessarily a kill, but when he's chasing Tommy and Trish, and she leaves the house where Rob was. She does that header through the window and does the somersault and lands on the bag that they tried to cover with dirt and leaves or whatever.
Yeah.
And then she runs into her house and closes the door. And Jason just busts through the door like Kool-Aid Man. Like the door is just made out of flimsy balsa wood, bashes it open. There may as well be an explosion behind him. And he just busts in. That I just love that scene. I think it's very emblematic, and it's kind of like a sign of things to come for the future movies, how he's just going to bust in like this and do what he needs to do, regardless of what's there.
If you follow us on Twitter, you've seen that scene because I share that gif quite fucking frequently of him busting through that door. And much like Doors, this continues Jason's parade of hate against windows because previous to this, like he only threw one body through a window in a movie. I think he throws like fucking 6 people through windows in this movie, including himself a couple times, which is, I mean, this movie has a lot of rain and a lot of broken fucking windows, and people are going in them, whether they're dead or alive, or they're going out. Just don't get near a window in this movie. It's going to end poorly.
He takes care of a set of twins. I mean, he stabs the one with the spear and he throws the other one through the window.
Right, onto a car. And that is the stunt work for that too. Like anytime someone goes through a window in this movie, the stunt work is just so well done because I'm not sure that I'm pretty sure they're using an actual body to make this jump. I don't think they're just throwing like a sack of marbles through, like I'm pretty sure they've done in a couple of these other movies where like a leg will kind of flop over weird or something like that as it goes through the window.
I'm just always astonished when there's a scene where someone lands from a height onto a car and the person walks away. I mean, the twin flies out of the window, lands on her back on the roof of the car, and I think she even rolls off. And does she get up after that, or is she just done?
She's done after that, I believe, but I love that it blows out all the windows of the car, too.
It's a good effect. Practical effects, besides kills, look really good in this movie.
Well, everything looked, again,
I'm saying, like, in addition to, not just the kills, but the actual, like, stunt work and the practicality behind all that just looks top-notch.
Totally agree. Is there anything that you want to, like, kind of harp on, or do you have any negatives that you want to get to before we get back to, like, more fun stuff?
Loving all over this. No, I mean, there's not really a whole lot that when I watched it, I was like, oh, yeah. I mean, like you said, plot holes, obviously, it just happens. Like, it's just the nature of the beast with these kind of movies. But no, I think, like, overall, I don't really have many complaints about the movie in general. Stunt work is great. The kills are really imaginative. I love that this movie isn't super off the rails. I mean, I like those movies for what they are, too. But up until this point, it feels like they're still kind of being original with the kills. They haven't recycled too many. We don't see two people laying in a bed getting speared together or anything like that. Like I think we've probably seen in, I think 1 and 3, there's something like that happens.
It's in part 2 because it's the guy's sister and her boyfriend. That's one of them that gets speared.
Okay.
I know it's in part 2, and it's similar to the Kevin Bacon kill in part 1. It's like the reverse of it. But anyway.
But yeah, I just like that they're still being original. I think after this one is where they start to kind of recycle, or they start to they must have just had like a big, whiteboard or something where people just said ideas and they wrote them out. They're like, can we do this in the movie? Okay, we'll save that for part 7, or whatever. But this one feels like they're still being pretty original with all the kills minus 1 or 2. I think this one actually doesn't have any recycled kind of scenes. So yeah, in general, I don't really have any complaints that I can put into words right now.
For me, like the complaints, I wouldn't even really call it a complaint, but if I were going to like nitpick on anything, I don't feel like this movie needs the 2-3 minute recap, which is kind of fun because it's really just like a cut scene of not all, but a bunch of deaths from the first 3 movies. And I like seeing Mark get his meat cleaver to the face while wheeling down a hill in his wheelchair. And you have a lot of great kills in this franchise up to this point, and they do like a quick clip show of all of them to start this movie, basically, while telling you who Jason is.
Yeah, and it's kind of lends to the whole thing, like, we're closing the book on this. You may as well know. If you haven't seen any of this shit so far, this is what we did.
Yeah, but I also feel like that's kind of unnecessary. This is the fourth movie at this point in 4 years in this franchise. It's called The Final Chapter. Like, it doesn't take anything away from the movie. Like, it's not a negative in the sense that, like, oh, the whole fucking movie's downhill from obviously this is the first like 2 minutes of the movie, so it's not that big a deal. But it feels unnecessary because it's part 4. It's called The Final Chapter. Like, what the fuck did you think you were walking into? Like a new story? Like, come on.
Well, at least it's not something like Silent Night, Deadly Night 2, where they basically make half the movie, 3/4 of the movie.
50 minutes of it.
Yeah, is the first movie. The first 3 movies. I have met people that have walked out after the first 2 minutes of this movie and said, it can't get any better than this.
That's fair. I do like that we didn't get another dream sequence ending, though. So that's good.
Yeah, that's nice.
How do you feel about Tommy Jarvis? Because we haven't really talked much about him, and he's kind of a huge part of this franchise because he's one of the only reoccurring characters in this entire 12-movie run.
Well, he's Jason's brother.
He is Jason's brother. How do you feel about Jason's brother?
I just think it's interesting that they introduce him this way, and he's like a little, special effects nerd. He has this little...
He's Tom Sweeney.
Yeah.
Why do you think he's named Tommy?
That's okay. I guess I didn't think of that.
No, that's exactly... I think they did a really good job with him, though, because say what you want about Corey Feldman in 2024 or whenever, basically since he started making music. Say whatever you want about that Corey Feldman. This era Corey Feldman he's pretty likable for like an 80s kid in
little
movies.
Kid,
like,
in a movie.
Yeah,
right?
like
especially in a horror movie.
Yeah, but I mean, even up until was The Lost Boys the last thing he did that was really great? I'm not sure. He might have something after that was pretty good, but
well, it could be your opinion. I don't know. It's totally objective, right?
That's fair. Okay, you make a valid point, but I can't think of a lot of movies he did after he became much more like basically after the drugs took over, or outwardly took over. In this movie, he's pretty likable and pretty relatable as a kid who's dealing with this fucking insane situation. He's not obnoxious. He's not just like some little kid who's screaming through the whole movie. He has a couple things that are weird. And if you're picking up a hitchhiker because he helped you start your car, I understand that. Why all of a sudden you're letting this guy like be dragged into your child's room to sit there while he shows him his toys?
Come up to my room. I got to show you something. I don't know who the hell you are. And I literally met you 5 minutes ago, but come up to my room.
You walked into my house with a rifle and a knife. I don't know if I'm going to let you in my kid's room right away. Might want to get to know you a little bit.
Why don't you back that up?
That aside, I mean, that's, movie magic, I guess. That aside, he's a pretty likable character, and he somehow manages to stay likable over the course of the rest of these films, even though his character is arguably becomes like the biggest reason why Jason keeps going on through these movies.
He wants to see his brother again.
Well, that's true. Brother's love is a brother's love. I saw that in a different movie, and I can't remember what it is now.
That wasn't on Pornhub, was it?
No, it was, it's like a comic book movie or something like that. I want to say it has Samuel L. Jackson in it. What are you going to do? Motherfucker.
Band of Brothers.
Being called the final chapter, as you would expect, they try to kill Jason in this movie. They try to kill Jason in every movie, and, mixed results, I guess. We'll ignore the fact that somehow Jason's entire cranial structure changed in the 24 hours from when he was in the part 3 to part 4, like in movie time. How do you feel about the final battle or the main boss fight in this movie?
How does he actually get taken out?
Apparently Tommy figures this all out, and to me that's a pretty big plot hole too, that he figures all this out, because they're kind of going off the lore of Jason at this point, but Jason's only been on this like murder rampage for 2 days, so there is not really any real lore, but whatever. So let's throw that aside for a second. Tommy goes upstairs, bicks his head, sort of, minus some chunks for, good measure, goes downstairs looking like he just got diddled, and freaks Jason out, basically. He gives him the, dog that just ate too much of his own poop look. As he does that, Trish says something like, "I got you now, mother effer," and like hits Jason in the chest with a machete. Jason goes, "Urgh." Machete falls out. He turns around to go after Trish. Tommy picks up the machete and whacks the fuck out of him right on the side of the head. Well, that's where it starts. He hits him in the head first. Jason has blood squirt out. You get an amazing effect because when he falls down, he lands on the butt.
He falls on it.
Yeah, and it not only starts going through his head and through his eye socket, but you can actually, if you watch it a little slower, you can see it separating the top of his skull from,
right.
Yeah, like
it starts to slide
it's actually
off.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly and great. So he falls down and is like, and they think he's dead. Yeah, he farts. They think he's dead. They're hugging and stuff because everything's fine. And then Jason's like,
we're all hugging and shit.
Yeah. Jason's finger twitches and Tommy goes fucking ape shit and just starts hacking at him, presumably until he's in chunks. We don't really see Jason after that. Yeah. So that's basically how they kill Jason in this movie. And at this point of the franchise, that's good enough because he hasn't started, getting regurgitated by lightning and telekinesis and shit yet. So having recapped the third act or the end of this movie,
thanks.
Thoughts on that?
They got to be the sharpest machete ever. I don't know if you've ever bought a machete, but the ones I buy,
I have two.
Not singular. The ones that I buy, that I bought, these things are dull as fuck, man. You can barely chop down a tree or a tree. You can barely knock some leaves off a branch, So this is the sharpest machete.
If you're trying to chop down a tree with a machete, I got news for you, my friend. You're using the wrong tool.
Oh, shit. Hey, that's my problem. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I like that it's a double team. They take advantage of having two people and, hey, I'm going to distract them and then whack them a couple times. And then you distract them and I'll whack them a couple times. That's a nice touch. I don't think we've had any up to this point that have been 2-on-1 situations because we haven't had two survivors.
Well, kind of. You have Jenny in part 2 it's not as well done. Her boyfriend distracts him by letting Jason murder the fuck out of him. And she's like, I'm your mom.
Yes.
Yeah. Goes, brr.
Tommy says, I'm your brother, a.k.a. I'm little you. Remember me?
Close enough.
So taking care of Jason, I think they did a good job in kind of making it, again, a little different than the other. But it almost feels like they're closing the chapter, but they're also opening the next one because then we get to see Tommy looking all psycho at the camera. And it's very heavily implied that there's something up with this kid. If they don't go the way that they go, you almost think, oh, he's now imbued with the spirit of Jason Voorhees. You know, he's going to be the next.
He's got the evil in him.
Yeah.
And I would have been fine if that's the way they decided to go too. In fact, there's part of me that wonders if that would have been a better way to go with the series, but that's not what we got, so it doesn't matter. I don't mind that part of the ending, though, like, you know, cliffhanger, I guess, because, I mean, obviously we know now that this was not the final chapter, but it wouldn't, if they just made it say, like, the end, star wipe to credits, would have been kind of weird, right?
Yeah, you got to kind of give yourself an escape plan, I think.
Yeah. And at this point, too, like, this movie was, I think this was the second most profitable behind 3D of the franchise up to this point. So if they're still making money like hand over fist, you know, I know Paramount wanted to get away from making Friday the 13th movies. That's why they made the final chapter, and we're like, this is the final one. But that doesn't mean they couldn't have sold the rights to someone else and made a shit ton of money that way too. So it makes total sense to me that they don't just leave it with like a definitive end for whatever that's worth.
It's all about making money.
So I mentioned that we're going to circle back around to it. So Ted White passed away recently, which is not why I wanted to bring him up, but Ted White plays Jason in this. As I mentioned, he is the biggest, hulkingest. This is my favorite interpretation of Jason Voorhees. Do we need to go further than that, or do we want to go on that a little more?
No, I think it kind of elevates Jason from being, obviously the first one isn't Jason, the second one he's kind of like a hick, you know, he's like the overalls and the freaking sack head. And then the third one, he starts to get a little bit more physical. I mean, he's always been a big presence, obviously he's this huge dude, but yeah, I would agree. I think in this one he is like, this is the Jason that everyone knows and remembers, is being this big hulking, like thick, big ass dude that just looks like a goddamn monster.
It's good because the way they play this, and a lot of this has to do with them not showing a ton of Jason until it's time to see a ton of Jason. And they do show him run in this one, where I don't think he really runs prior to point. I don't think you see him run prior to this. So they kind of explain how he just pops up places without really explaining, like they don't take the time to show you his underground tunnels and all that shit. We'll get that later.
It's where he has pictures of his brother, Tommy Jarvis.
Right. But it does a good job of kind of keeping the mythos of Jason while keeping him grounded a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit.
Does Gordon the dog jump through the window?
Depends who you listen to. My answer would be he jumps and gets away. And the reason that's my answer is because the director on the commentary track for the movie has said he jumped out the window and got away. So I'm like, good enough.
Don't we hear Gordon yelp?
I don't think so. You just hear glass break. Or at least that's all I noticed this time.
The smartest character in all these movies, Gordon the dog.
Oh, yeah. Man's best friend is like, fuck this. I'm out of here.
I'm out of here. Fuck this shit.
See you, Corey Feldman. Fuck off. But yeah,
you can go rape some other dog.
I know a lot of people say that he gets thrown out the window and is dead, but if the director says that's not what it means, I'm going to just go with that.
I'll accept it. I'll accept your answer.
Yeah, well, that happens sometimes, once in a while. I do kind of wish there was a crazy Ralph, facsimile in this. There is no harbinger of death in this movie. No weird guy with an eyeball on the side of the road. That's a little bit of a bummer, but you really don't need it at this point.
Earliest mention or earliest reference I've ever seen to the North Face. Rob has a North Face tent. It has a big North Face logo above the entrance.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't notice that. Look at that. Picking out all the details that I don't give a shit about.
Yep. That's what I do.
Well, we're out camping, and when we go out camping, we have to cook on the grill. So let's fire up the grill. What time is it?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
That's right. We still have that, even though it has nothing to do with this movie. Sean, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Well, I'm going to be almost shorter and sweeter than I ever am. I'm just going to say I really like this movie. The reason I like it is because it's not because of the star power, but it's kind of cool to see some faces that you recognize rather than just some nameless, hitchhiking bummy kids that just want to fuck each other. So it's kind of cool that you see Corey Feldman. We see Crispin Glover in a really cool role. I love looking for corkscrews ever since I've seen this. So that's always fun. I like that the movie has an actual plot, that it actually tries to build on these characters. Like I mentioned earlier, it feels like it really services the movie instead of just filling out a runtime with actually having characters instead of just nameless fodder that get cut down. This is probably one of my favorite of the franchise. I've seen it probably the most. I got to give it 7.5 packs of Patootsies out of 11 hot dog.
Packs of Patootsies?
Whose hot dog is this, huh? Is it yours?
Yeah, packs of Patootsies.
I've just changed how I'm going to rate this based off what you just said. I think anyone that's listening to this show or has heard me babble, like, this is not just this is my favorite of the Friday the 13th franchise. It is my favorite slasher movie. Everything about this movie kind of delivers the way that I want a slasher movie to be. It's still got that like grimy feel to it. Like, you kind of feel like you're doing something wrong by watching this movie in a way, which works for me. Again, the characters are all very likable. There's no one that at least is hateable in it. There's a couple weird moments in it, like speaking of hitchhiking bums, like, I don't understand why Jason like knifes the fuck out of a girl just trying to eat a banana. She didn't break any of the sex rules or any of the drug rules, but you know, he also like really gets into it with like a really heavy grunt for no apparent reason. I guess that's how he powers up after walking back from the hospital. Anyway, this has my favorite interpretation of Jason. Ted White is fucking awesome in this role. We get Tom Savini in his A game doing everything he can to make sure that we don't have any more of these movies. You get, if you hadn't seen Goonies before this, or if you just, whatever order you found them in, you get a very young, arguably one of his first, not arguably, it is one of his first roles in Corey Feldman. I almost said Corey Haim. That would have been confusing. And again, the movie itself is got a lot of really well done comedic timing in it, in the points where Jason isn't on screen, to kind of keep you engaged and interested in these characters. And it's not just like funny in a way like, oh my God, this is so bad that I'm laughing at it. Like, these are genuinely like maybe not well written, but likable characters. Some of the best kills in the franchise, and just everything about it. The soundtrack lands. It's damn near perfect. So I give this movie a dazzling 9.5 hitchhiking bummy kids out of 10. This is the high watermark for Friday the 13th to me. And it has hitchhiking bummy kids, which is my new favorite word. As always, we thank you for hanging out with us. We're going to ask that if you have time, give us a like, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform of choice. That would really help us out. You can find all of our old episodes and this episode as well at crap.town, which is our site. Or you could go to the You Run Podcast site, which is yourunpodcast.com, where you can find all of our episodes, as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. Normally, we try to interact with the audience. We did not make that effort today, but that's fine. When we do that, you can find all our questions of the week and all the other things that we do on every social media all over the place. We are at Dewey Podmonster. We would appreciate it if you gave us a follow and responded to some of those questions of the week so we can include you in the show. Sean, what else is going on?
If you like what we're doing here and you want to hear more or want to see more, check out our YouTube channel. It's at Dewey Podmonster. That's youtube.com/@DeweyPodmonster. We post little clips from the show. We post little, what we call shoot the shit, where we kind of talk about random topics that don't involve movies. And generally we're together when we do it. So if you want to hear more of what we have to say about random stuff, check us out.
Until further notice, we'll be back Tuesday, couple days. You'll hear another episode. We're going to go drink some beer, and we're going to go get high, and we're going to go find other reasons for Jason to come out and treat us like some hitchhiking bummy kids. And hopefully we make it to next week. So have a good week. Cheers.
Blah, 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 blah.
Tootsies. Packs of the Tootsies. Packs of the Tootsies. Excellent.